Television cameras across America point at a single rocket on a launch pad in Florida, broadcasting live because the government has promised this flight will finally answer the Soviets and prove the country hasn't fallen behind in space.
It rises 4 feet off the ground, and then it doesn't rise anymore. Stay to the end, because the humiliation of that single afternoon is exactly what pushed America's real answer to Sputnik into orbit less than 2 months later. On October 4th, 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik 1, the first artificial satellite ever to orbit Earth. Radio operators around the world could pick up its simple beeping signal as it passed overhead. It was proof of a capability the United States did not yet have. 1 month later, the Soviets launched Sputnik 2, carrying a living passenger into orbit. 2 headline-grabbing firsts, back-to-back. American confidence and American press coverage turned sharply anxious. Newspapers ran headlines questioning whether the United States had fallen dangerously behind, and members of Congress demanded answers. The White House needed a visible, public win, and quickly. The Navy's Vanguard program, originally planned as a careful, scientifically driven satellite project on its own more cautious timeline, was suddenly pushed forward and put in the spotlight as America's answer to Sputnik. The rocket scheduled for December 6th, Vanguard TV3, was technically meant to be a test flight, not the full orbital attempt. But under enormous political pressure, the Navy allowed it to be presented publicly as America's real shot at matching the Soviets. Reporters and television crews were invited to Cape Canaveral to watch. It would not be a quiet internal test. It would be broadcast live to a nation already anxious about losing a technological race it hadn't realized it was in.
At the moment of ignition, Vanguard TV3 lifted roughly 4 feet off the launch pad. Then its engine lost thrust. The rocket settled back down and collapsed in on itself, rupturing its fuel tanks and erupting into a fireball on live television.
The tiny satellite it had been carrying, only about the size of a grapefruit, was thrown clear by the blast. It landed in nearby palmetto bushes, its radio transmitter still beeping, broadcasting a signal from a satellite that was now lying in the dirt a few hundred feet from the wreckage of its own rocket. The failure played out on television screens across the country and around the world. British newspapers, never shy about American misfortune, nicknamed it Kaputnik, Flopnik, and Stay Putnik almost overnight. For a country that had just watched 2 Soviet triumphs in a row, a live, televised explosion on the launch pad was about as public and as painful a failure as the space race could produce.
Behind the scenes, a separate Army team, led by rocket engineer Wernher von Braun, had been pushing for months to be allowed to attempt a launch of their own. After Vanguard's public failure, they finally got the green light. On January 31st, 1958, less than 2 months after the Vanguard disaster, their rocket successfully placed Explorer 1 into orbit, becoming the first successful American satellite, and giving the country the moment it had failed to deliver on live television. Explorer 1 wasn't just a symbolic win. Its onboard instruments, built by physicist James Van Allen, detected something nobody had predicted: bands of intense radiation trapped by Earth's magnetic field, now known as the Van Allen radiation belts. It remains one of the most significant scientific discoveries of the early space age, made almost by accident, on a satellite rushed into orbit largely to erase the memory of a rocket that collapsed on a launch pad 2 months earlier. Von Braun's team had wanted to attempt exactly this kind of launch since before Sputnik ever flew, and had been held back for political reasons. Vanguard's failure was the very thing that finally cleared their path. Vanguard eventually succeeded too. A later Vanguard rocket reached orbit in March 1958 and remains, remarkably, the oldest human-made object still circling Earth today. The program that started with a 4-foot, nationally televised collapse quietly outlasted almost everything launched after it. Every space program, in every country, has a moment like this one buried somewhere in its history, the failure watched by everyone, right before the win that made people forget it happened. If the space race's most humbling moments are as fascinating to you as its triumphs, subscribe. More strange, true space stories are coming.